Hi, my name is Natasha Marling, and I'm a high school art teacher in South Carolina. Today, I want to talk to you about annotation. I found this strategy in the textbook 50 Instructional Routines to Develop Content Literacy. It's the third edition by Douglas Fisher, William Bronzo, Nancy Frey, and Gay Ivey. This strategy is discussed in Chapter 2 on page 9 if you would like to read more about it. Now, this strategy is one that I think many people are familiar with, but I am putting my own twist on it, which is why I've titled this presentation, A Colorful Look at a Well-Known Process. So first, we're going to say, what is annotation? Simply put, annotations are notes that you take while reading that you write directly onto the text. That is the key thing that makes it an annotation. If you write it somewhere else, say on a sheet of paper next to your text or something like that, it's not an annotation. You have to write directly in your text. So here I have an image that shows what that looks like. Now, why would we encourage students to write in books? I know personally I did not start using this strategy until I began my master's degree because I was always afraid that if I wrote in the book, I was going to mess it up, I wouldn't be able to send it back, or while I was in high school, the teachers would get mad at me if you wrote directly in the textbooks because they used the same one every year. But in fact, this strategy has lots of pros. Now, I got some of these from my personal experience and some of them from the textbook 50 Instructional Routines to Develop Content Literacy. So some of the pros of this strategy are, firstly, it helps to deepen your comprehension of the text while you're reading. It helps keep the reader active and awake. I know personally sometimes I am reading and I'll start thinking about something else. Next thing I know, I've read an entire paragraph. I have no idea what it says because I was busy thinking about what I was going to make for dinner. So this active reading strategy helps keep students focused on what they're actually reading instead of letting their mind wander. It also perpetuates the thinking process, and it helps students remember fleeting thoughts that would otherwise be forgotten. I cannot tell you how many times I've been writing a paper, trying to remember a specific line or something that made me think of something from the text, and I have to go back and reread pages to find it. This strategy helps avoid that whole problem because you have it right there, written in the text, and you know what you were thinking when you read that line. There are a few cons, as I kind of mentioned before. Number one, students cannot write in school-provided text because if they do that, the school sees that as ruining the book. Also, you must have a separate text for each student each year. However, these things can easily be overcome through the use of photocopying or finding text on the internet and printing them off so that your student can have a physical copy on a piece of paper that they can write on and it wouldn't be considered, ruining the text. So where does color come into play? Being an art teacher and an artist, I love to use color whenever possible. It helps me remember things and makes notes more fun. In the classroom, there are always markers, crayons, colored pencils, and other ways to write in color, so we might as well use them. I know personally when I was in high school, I had about 20 gel pens in a million different colors, and I always used them on my notes, and I felt that doing that really helped me remember the information better and helped me keep it organized. So that's a technique that I've continued using all the way into my adult life. So, what do you need to do? First, to get started, you need to have your students list what type of things they may want to note down while reading a text from your discipline. Now, you need to make sure to encourage students to include things that are relevant to your specific discipline. You're obviously going to be looking for different things when you read a math word problem than you would be looking for in a poem, so keep it kind of specific to your content. Make sure students are thinking that way. Also, you may want to have students think about what specific text you're going to be reading. Even if they're reading a poem, there's different kinds of poems, so there might be something specific to look for because of what type of text it is. Students should know some background information about the text so they can create an appropriate list. If you do not want to include background information, you may have to help create the list or create it completely by yourself because students won't really know what to look for if they don't kind of already know a little bit about the text. So here's an example list of things students may want to note down when reading an artist statement. Now, my students would be able to create this list because we read artist statement fairly often, especially when we're learning about a current artist. You can always go to their website and they'll usually have a little artist statement tab. You can click on that and you can learn about the artist by reading that. So because my students are familiar with what an artist statement is, they would sort of know what type of things to be looking for. So this is a possible list they could create. Number one, you want to look for things that you agree with. Number two, you want to look for things that you disagree with. You would also want to look for words you don't know and key facts about the artist and his or her style, as well as things you would like to know more about. After you've created your list, you need to assign a color to each type of information. Now, in my art class, we always talk about, the feelings and emotions and meanings behind colors. So when I assigned these colors, I was sort of thinking about that. But it's not necessary for this technique to work for you to think about that. So if you want to talk about how green usually is good, and that's why we're doing it for things you agree with, you can. If not, just pick your colors randomly. So for this example, I've selected green for things you agree with, red for things you disagree with, words you don't know are in yellow, key facts about the artist and his or her style are in blue, and things I would like to know more about are going to be highlighted in purple. Once you've decided on this, it might be good to post your list and what the colors mean sort of off to the side. If you have an additional whiteboard or a little poster you can put it on so students can refer to that, that would be great. Then you need to hand out a copy of the text to each student so they can write on it. You need to make sure every student has access to all 5 colors used to take notes as they read. If this is your first time annotating a text, you should model what to do by putting the text up on the board and showing the students how to annotate the text before you expect them to do it by themselves. Students will not be able to do this successfully if they are not familiar with the technique. So I'm going to walk through the rest of this presentation sort of as if I'm teaching this technique to my students so you can see how I would model that. Now, if you have a smartboard, you can annotate right on the text and have students follow along on their papers. You could also use an overhead projector and write with color markers. What I did for this presentation is I went ahead and annotated the text in advance on each slide using the insert shape, and I underlined and added my little notes that way. So there are really a lot of different ways you can do this for your students. You just kind of have to figure out, do I have a projector? Do I have a smartboard? Do I have an overhead projector where I write on it? Any of those things will work. So just modify this for whatever equipment you have handy for yourself. So after you've done that, you need to go ahead and put your text up. So I'm going to go through this text as I would with my class, modeling how to annotate it. And this is the last 2 paragraphs from Brett Kern's artist statement. He is an artist that I do teach my students about. And the artist statement does include more paragraphs than this, but I chose these to focus on for my modeling, and you'll kind of see how that works in here in a minute. So starting now, this is what I would read to my students. All right, guys, we're going to learn about Brett Kern and his artist statement. We already looked at his artwork for our starter activity, identified the elements and principles. Now we're going to dig deeper to learn more about him. So here I have the last 2 paragraphs, and we're going to use a reading technique called annotation to help us really get the most out of this text that we can. So I'm going to read the text aloud to you, and I want you to follow along with your text at your seats, and I'm going to show you how I would use our different colors that we already identified. I've got them right here on the board if you forget what color means what, to sort of highlight the material and make notes. So follow along as I read. I find the mold making process imitates in a certain way the fossilization process. Objects are covered in a material that captures their shape and texture, and this, in turn, preserves the object as a rock-like representation. Movies, television, toys, and games dominated the cultural landscape of my youth. I'm going to stop right here because I feel that that sentence really resonates with me. I think that when I think back on my childhood, movies, television, toys, and games were like the most important thing to me. So I'm going to go ahead and underline that in green and say most kids' lives, this is probably going to ring true for them. Okay, the next sentence says, I'm a product of this specific time period, and I like to think of my artwork as the fossils that will help preserve it. So from reading this first paragraph, I look back and I see that fossils has been mentioned in both the first sentence and the last sentence. So this is probably a key element to his artwork. Now, in the first sentence, he mentions the process for making these fossils, which is the mold making. And then he says, the fossils will help preserve it. And that it is referring back to the movies, television, toys, games, and dominant cultural landscapes of my youth. So I'm going to go ahead and put blue on those things so that we can kind of remember these are the key points, the things that this artist is trying to focus on. He's using the mold making process to create fossils to preserve his objects of his youth that we highlighted up here in green. Now, the next paragraph says, my most recent body of work, the Hellenistic series, recontextualized ancient Greek sculpture as pop culture icons from the 1980s. That is a big sentence with a lot going on in it. First, he has this word recontextualizes. That is a really long word. I might want to look that up to make sure that I understand the meaning. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that in yellow and put a little question mark to remind myself that, hey, I'm not really 100% sure what this means. I might need to go back and look at that. The other thing from the sentence that stands out is it says pop culture icons from the 1980s. I know I was only alive for 2 years during the 80s. I don't think any of y'all were alive, so we might need to look up what pop culture icons from the 1980s are, because I don't really know what that is. So we're going to go ahead and underline that in purple, and maybe we'll come back to that, look some of those up later. Now it says, while making comparison between ancient and contemporary cultures, the pieces also highlight the simultaneous difficulty and joy of growing up while trying to hold on to one's childhood. Simultaneous difficulty and joy of growing up. I don't know if I really experienced that. I was always excited to grow up. So I'm going to kind of highlight this. And we might want to think about, is this statement really true for everyone? Now, I'm willing to listen and see if any of you guys maybe agree or disagree with this statement, or if there's any other words you don't know or anything else you want to add. Does anyone else have something to add to these two paragraphs? At this point, I would go ahead and take suggestions from my students. So, now that I've sort of modeled how you would walk through that paragraph with your students, showing them how to annotate, this is what's next. First, you want to check for understanding with the students, ask if anyone would like to add anything or if anyone disagrees with anything. That's what I did with my last little sentence there after finishing annotating the paragraph. During this step, feel free to modify any of your annotations based on the understanding of the class. There may be more unknown words or statements that students agreed or disagreed with, or things you need to look up. So definitely interact with the class, get their input, and make sure that you are validating their answers if they're good, and tell them, this is a thinking process. After this, give the students the complete document. So I gave them the last two paragraphs first. We went ahead and read that and annotated it. I would now give them the other portion of the artist statement, the first 3 paragraphs, and I would let them go ahead and read that and annotate it themselves. Again, you could give them the whole document at the beginning, but I feel that my students would get distracted by this. So if you don't think it would be a distraction, you can do that to save time in handing things out, but I would wait till after we've done the practice to hand out the entire document. So you would then give your students time to go ahead and read the other 3 paragraphs of the artist statement. And after you've done that, you may want to give them some time to discuss with their table or their row, depending on how your students are organized, so they can kind of have a good feeling that they've done the right thing. I would really encourage this for if it's the first time, because a lot of times when it's the first time doing something, students might be unsure, so they would like to talk to a friend to make sure they're on the right track. Another thing about this being the first time is I would get student volunteers to come up to the board and add annotations they made over the rest of the text. Other times I might call on people, but since it's the first time, again, I would get volunteers, so students who aren't as sure that they're doing the right thing could get a little bit of reinforcement before we move on to me just randomly selecting people, because I don't want to cause too much stress on a new subject, because I feel that could make the students really just not want to do it at all. So ways you could choose this, you could have a student volunteer for each color, maybe have, this student's going to come up and underline all the things that him and his table didn't agree with, or you could have a student representative from each table or row come up and do a paragraph, or you could just have, students go sentence by sentence. There are plenty of different ways you could get volunteers for this. After the annotations are complete, it's important to discuss with students and make sure they are all on the same page. Student disagreement creates a great opportunity to use the idea that everyone has different viewpoints, and opposing viewpoints can both be valid. So to kind of exemplify what I'm talking about here, let's go back to our paragraph. This last sentence where it says, stimulates difficulty and joy of growing up while trying to hold on to one's childhood. Maybe I would have some students who felt that they did experience this, and I could say, well, if you agree with this statement, that's fine. You need to underline it. I disagree with this statement, and this is because of our different background experiences, and neither one is right or wrong. And I feel it's always important to try and show students that there can be multiple different viewpoints on different things to help them develop cognitively. So that's how I would use this strategy in my art classroom. But this is not something just for art. This is something for every subject area. So I'm going to go through how you could use this color-coded annotation strategy with each different subject. So first, math. If you were doing a word problem, you could have students select a color to underline amounts and another color to underline words that denote operations, such as addition or division. You may also want to choose a color to underline distractor information. I know a lot of times in word problems, they'll put some extra numbers in there just to throw you off. So this could be a useful strategy to help your students in math read word problems carefully. In history, you may be reading a first-hand account of events. You could have students select a color to underline important people, another for important dates, another for important places. For higher grades, you may want to select a color to indicate information that could show bias. Now, the type of information that you're looking for will really range based on what the age of your students is. If your students are older, you're going to be wanting to look for more complex information, probably like bias, opinion, things you agree or disagree with. If your students are younger, you might just want to be looking for more factual information like dates, names, and places. In science, you could use this strategy on a descriptive article about scientific findings. For example, maybe you read an article about a new species of frog. You could have students select a color to highlight information about how the frog is like other species and another color for what makes it unique or unlike other species. Students could also select a color for information they would like to research further. And just like with the art example, and really with any of these examples, you can always have them pick a color for words they don't know, and this is a great way to sort of see if they're understanding the text and help build their vocabulary. For a foreign language, you might be analyzing a short paragraph about something simple like going to the beach, especially at the lower levels. The students might need to learn how to identify the different types of speech, such as verbs, nouns, adjectives, and pronouns. They could select a different color for each one of these. This would also be a great way to create a beach vocabulary list. For English, they might be reading a short story. Students could select one color for words they don't know, one color for ideas they want more background information on, and another color for each one of the key parts of the story: rising action, climax, falling action. You could use this for poems too to help identify rhymes or different syllables in haiku, stuff like that. Really, this strategy can be applied to any text. The key is identifying what kind of information you're looking for and then assigning that specific type of information to a color. Now, this strategy can really be used with any grade level. The key is ensuring the text to be annotated is an appropriate level for your students. So for younger students, you want to limit the number of colors to 2 or 3. We don't want to overwhelm them with too much information. You want to make sure the text is not too long. For older students, you want to make sure you're emphasizing writing of questions or notes next to the text that you underlined, because they're going to be thinking of more complex ideas and questions, and writing this directly on the text is really going to help them stay engaged and understand what they're doing. So, annotation and color. Oh, the possibilities. I love color coding things and making keys, and I just think that using color can make taking notes more fun for any subject or grade level. People are going to be more engaged in something that is colorful than something that is black and white. Also, the colors help you differentiate between the different types of material, making it easier and faster for you to understand what's going on. When you combine these colors with the tried and true method of annotation, you can increase student excitement about taking notes and their level of involvement with the text when reading text in your specific content areas. So thank you so much for watching my presentation. I do have here the sources, both the textbook and where I got Brett Kern's artist statement. I also have the websites that I pulled all my images from, and that's it. So thanks for watching, and I hope this strategy will help you annotate your text successfully and keep your students involved in reading. Thank you so much.